Let's talk a little bit about behavioral change models. I want to take a brief moment here and really talk about behavioral change models as being something a little unique in a psychology of sport and physical activity course. And the reason is that these models or these theories, these viewpoints really tend to be associated with community health, right? And so if you think of like public health foundations, governmental agencies, other private foundations, these tend to be associated with behavioral change models, which are basically just trying to help us understand how behavior can change. And they usually have that kind of sense of health associated with them. So locally, something like the Kansas Health Foundation would be a great example. But the reason, sort of the connection for us, is that sport and physical activity practitioners are going to be heavily involved in their communities, wherever they're located. And so think of a lot of the corporate social responsibility initiatives that sport organizations engage in. Many of them tend to be associated with some form of health, right? And so the NFL's Play 60 is just an absolutely wonderful example of that. And again, feel free to put this presentation in presentation mode, click on that, and you can actually watch one of those commercials. So really what these behavioral change models are trying to do is prevent poor health, promote better health, and then create positive communities and environments. And hopefully from that sort of simple statement, you can see why a lot of sport, recreation, physical activity, tourism, or entertainment organizations really do want to be associated with kind of a sense of public health. The very first model that we'll talk about is the health belief model. And this is one of the older ones, and it's really fairly simple. It's really trying to look at why people don't adopt or engage in healthy behaviors. That's it. And it's this really, really simple process of the person's belief in something, whether it's environmental illness or their own poor health or eating habits. You have their belief that this thing is a threat to them. That's going to be combined with the effectiveness of their belief in the effectiveness of these recommended healthy behaviors or actions, right? Those two things combined are going to influence and really equal the person's willingness to change or adopt healthy behaviors. So think of something like eating, right? And so if you believe that the way that you have always grown up eating is not actually a threat to your overall health, and the proposed societal recommendation of eating X number of carbs, X number of green leafy vegetables, and all those, and whole grains and those types of things, that those things don't necessarily apply to you or your family or your community, then the likelihood that you're going to change the way you eat to eat in a more healthy way is greatly diminished. That's all the health belief model is doing, the 1 + 2 = 3 approach. This can be applied to a lot of different things, but healthy living strategies and behaviors tends to be one. The trans-theoretical model is actually really interesting because it was one of the sort of very first foundational theories that I was ever exposed to when kind of getting into sports psychology. And it's really associated and been heavily associated with fitness and performance psychology. And it's really just trying to assess an individual's readiness to act on a new sort of healthy behavior lifestyle. And then it really provides strategies in the process to kind of guide that individual through that exploration process. When you start thinking about it, there's a lot of different ways that the trans-theoretical model can be applied within kind of a sports psychology setting. But one that I really kind of enjoy is thinking about whether someone is going to start an exercise and fitness routine. All right, and just kind of think about that as we sort of walk through the depiction of the cycle over here on the right-hand side of the screen. There's 6 basic stages, right? And the very first one is the pre-contemplation stage. It labels it that ignorance is bliss. So you're not contemplating, you're not thinking about changing your behaviors and beginning to work out more, okay? And then you move over one to contemplation. And this is where now you're starting to think. You're starting to um, contemplate, think about what I should be doing. Should I start to engage in working out on a regular basis? And I talk about all this because if you think about the popularity of things like Orange Theory, other group fitness courses, there is a process that people go to in terms of, no, I'm not ready to participate in something like that, to now I'm thinking about it. And then they move into the preparation stage. So maybe they have a friend that attends some particular class or kind of group fitness session, and so maybe they ask them about it, and they're like, hey, do you mind if I go and maybe I can be a guest, and you can even go to the YMCA and get a kind of a day pass or a guest pass kind of thing. So that's you're sort of testing the waters, and then maybe after that you decide, yes, I'm going to join one of these clubs, or I'm going to engage in cryotherapy and be part of kind of boutique fitness because it's something that's going to be good for me in my overall health, whether it's my body, my mental health, a combination thereof, whichever. Then you have the maintenance. The maintenance stage is, are they still doing this? Are they still actively involved? Are they still going on a regular basis? Are they still setting and achieving their health and fitness goals? And then if it's sort of become part of their life, then they're no longer in the sort of contemplation model any longer, right? It's just part of who they are, and that's sort of the determination. Now, for a lot of people, when it comes to physical activity or physical fitness, there is sort of this relapse where maybe they don't engage in this type of routinized activity. They start seeing that maybe they're having adverse weight gains, or their blood pressure is increasing or something like that, and then they start the process over again. That's really kind of the simple gist of how something like the trans-theoretical model might work for those of you that are going to be involved in something like a YMCA or an Orange Theory or a Genesis or a physical fitness type setting. This is something that some of the folks are going to be using. The theory of planned behavior is really like the two previous series we've talked about. It's really straightforward. But it's really trying to explain or predict health-related behaviors, whether you're talking about tobacco, substance, or alcohol use, or maybe even something like accessing medical care, healthy support options, those types of things. And it really just has these 6 components that really kind of speak to or help us understand the person's control over the behavior and really their intention to engage in something. That's why it's called the theory of planned behavior, their ability to engage. Okay. Now, one of the things I think is really interesting before we kind of really talk briefly about the model is that the theory of planned behavior has been very useful because it looks at understanding the relations among beliefs, attitudes, and behavioral intentions, right? And if that word behavioral intention is unique or familiar to you, think of marketing, point of purchase, right? So advertising, public relations, healthcare, sport management, different forms of financial and other forms of sustainability. Theory of planned behavior has been very kind of at the forefront of helping to explain the behavioral intention. One example too is think about something like fundraising, right? So your want or ability to engage in giving to the Shocker Athletics Scholarship Organization, for example, right? What goes into that process? So people that are involved in sales, people who are involved in donor activities or development, this is going to be a theoretical perspective or a model that would be helpful in some of your work day to day. The whole thing boils down to this. Your intention to engage in a behavior is really influenced by your attitudes towards the behavior, the general view kind of from society towards that behavior, and your belief that you can actually control things. All right, so let's kind of walk through that with fundraising. Let's say the general view towards fundraising, especially if you're trying to provide scholarships for student athletes, is a positive one. A lot of people want to provide opportunities for individuals to use, some of their athletic talents to put that towards higher education, a college degree, because we know the power of higher education being able to impact people's lives, their family, the community, those types of things. All right. So, what's your personal attitude in regard to giving, you know, donating towards higher education or scholarships in general? Maybe you had a good experience as a student athlete, therefore, you'd be predisposed to most likely want to give back. Let's say, however, you had a bad experience either as a student athlete. So then now you're starting to think and weigh the pros and cons of maybe I had a bad experience. We know society sees this as a good thing. What should I do? That type of thing. And then the belief that you can control things. Does your gift, for example, is it measurable? Can you actually make a difference with that? You know, how much, if someone says you can give $10,000, you can give $50,000, and that's it. You only have those two options, or you can give, $150,000. You have those three options. Well, if you don't have control over how much you want to give, because you say, financially where I am right now, I'm recently at, a college graduate, I want to give $1,000. If you don't have control over how much you can give, then the likelihood, as it works through this model, is that you probably won't give and donate to that scholarship organization at this time. It doesn't mean you can't go back, right? But it means that the intention right now probably is not in alignment with what they want and what you want. Okay, so the theory of planned behavior is just really trying to think about, how you are a part of this process that involves society, involves different norms and values, involves whatever the worthy thing is. If it's talking about giving scholarships, or if it's talking about if the behavior is engaging in healthy behavior such as avoiding substance abuse or things like that, it's trying to kind of get at all those different things, which is why it has the attitude, subjective norm, perceived behavioral control, intention, and behavior components of the model. Again, just like everything else, it's going to be relatively simple because we want quick models that can help us explain things and get us working, get us moving. It provides information so that we can take that information and go and do whatever it is that we need to do. The last one that we'll talk about here in this brief section is social norms theory. Kind of the first and the best known theory or health behavior model for looking at and addressing alcohol-related injury in college students. So drinking to your blackout, binge drinking, those types of things. That's really kind of what social norms theory was. Really kind of that's how it made its mark. And it's relatively simple again, because look at the title. It's a theory about how social norms are going to impact you, right? So it focuses on the environment. And I'm not talking about the natural environment with trees, rocks, and grass and things like that. I'm talking about the social environment. So it focuses on that social environment and then your interpersonal groups. These people, these peer groups that are going to be important to you. All right, and essentially what it's saying here, it's relatively simple, is that your peers establish these norms that are important and impactful on you that sometimes contradict actual norms of society. Okay, so think about that for just a second. The peer groups establish norms that maybe contradict or become more important than the norms of society. So your friends' norms and those values become more important to you on a day-to-day basis than the cultural norms and values of whatever it is that we're talking about. And the gap between those two is the misperception. And behavior is the result of misperception. All right? So, and we'll talk about kind of how we can use this in the world of sport. Social norm interventions really are attempts to correct or address that misperception that we were just talking about. And they're really heavily used in marketing or PR campaigns. And these PR campaigns are going to be directed towards specific communities or different types of peer groups, right? One of the things that there's been, mental health, being able to sort of destigmatize mental health has been one way that the social norms theory has been used in the world of athletics. It's also been if we're trying to decrease hazing, concussion, education, awareness. So in my day, that's right, kind of as someone who's older than most that are probably consuming this lecture, getting your bell rung was definitely something that happened. We now know them as concussions, but back then you get your bell rung. The norm for, that my high school football team, for example, was you just kind of shake it off. Maybe you sit out of play, and the social norm of being tough and making sure that that didn't mess with you, that's what was important to you. Now, society back then was kind of the same way, so there wasn't necessarily a misperception because society and the team that I was on were in alignment. Well, let's fast forward to now. Now we have education awareness that knows that these concussions happen. And so society's view on the topic of concussions has changed. But what if there is a team that still has that sort of archaic norm and view on concussions similar to what I had growing up, right? So now you would see that there's a misperception, okay? That's really what we're talking about here with social norms theory. Educational programs are often ways of trying to intervene as well. So you might have marketing and PR campaigns, but then you also might have educational and awareness. So in an intercollegiate athletic setting, you might have a speaker come in and talk about the importance of mental health, and it's not about weakness, it's not about failure, it's not about a weakness of character or anything like that. You might have a speaker come in and talk about concussions, or being able to prevent sexual assault, or the negative aspects that hazing can have on a team setting. That's kind of social norms theory in a nutshell. All of these behavioral change models are exactly what they sound like. They're intended to help us better understand how and why behaviors change or do not change, with the idea that if we want to change something within our sport organization or within our community or within our industry, these might help explain some of the unhealthy behaviors that are going on, and might provide a little bit of an opportunity or an awareness of how we can move forward and attempt to start changing things for the better.